My name is Owen Hanson. I was a football star at USC and then ran one of the biggest illegal sports betting businesses in America. This is how crime works. I was in illegal sports betting back in the early 2007 all the way till my arrest in 2015. In the illegal gambling industry, there's close to $673 billion a year that's gambled. The biggest wager I took was $250,000 on a Super Bowl bet. And eventually, once I started taking bets from the cartel, the bets became bigger and bigger. It took me to sober up to realize, like, wow, what the f was I doing? I was recruited by USC in 1999, 2000 for volleyball, and I got offered a volleyball scholarship 2 years later, walking onto the USC football team. I was a tight end for the 2003 and 2004 national championship team, and I was on special teams as well. My first job interview I had, and it was for a big real estate developer out of Los Angeles. I showed up with my national championship ring, and he hired me on the spot. He said, man, I want you part of my team. So, right out of college, 2004, 2005, I'm, making almost six figures, and I'm getting paid commissions on any deals I bring in, and life was good, right? That's what you go to school for. You go to USC for the networking, and that's what I did. I networked with everybody. I had this Rolodex, and I would keep their phone number, keep their email, and always put it in my mind. Dad's proud, mom's proud. Everyone's looking at me like, wow, the golden boy, the SC golden boy. He graduated. He's working for a developer. He's going to be the man one day. And then that recession hit, 2007. And I remember I was like the first one or two guys to go. And obviously growing up as a kid, you watch, the great movies like Goodfellas and Casino and Scarface. So I was like, man, what if I could be a bookie? I went to my Rolodex, and I remember my dad had a friend that was Italian that was a bookmaker. And I was like, man, maybe if my dad will understand the situation that I lost my job, maybe he'll introduce me to his friend. And I kept begging my dad, and finally, I think after like the 15th time, my pops is like, all right, one meetup with Tony, and that's it. We met at this underground bar, and it was like a basement. I walked in, and I give Uncle Tony an Italian kiss on each side. I said, I got the perfect network, man. Let me utilize it. He says, man, listen, I'll see what you can do. I'm going to my friends that are now in the NFL. I'm going to my friends that are working on Wall Street, and everyone's starting to bet with me. And the first 6 months, on one player, this big contractor, commercial contractor, he lost $1 million in cash. I got paid $200,000 commission. And I went back to Uncle Tony. I said, Tony, man, I'm doing all the work, man. You guys are taking 80%. I said, you got to let me, these are my customers. Let me get a little more, man. He goes, I can't do it. And that day forward, I said, okay, you can't do it? No problem. I'm going to figure out a way to do it myself. Jan Portocarrero, was my mentor in the sports betting. He was the boss of Uncle Tony. He was with Macho Sports. I got my hands dirty. I flew offshore. I'm watching and I'm learning. And everything that happens, I'm paying attention to, because I'm putting in my mind, okay, this is how I'm going to build mine when I go to Costa Rica and build my own. You got this guy moving the lines. You got this guy answering the phones for VIP customers. You got Debbie and Tina answering the phones. Okay, I get it. Now I understand what I need to build. And they got busted, I believe, in 2013 under a Macho Sports RICO indictment for illegal bookmaking. And as soon as they got taken down, my network expanded tenfold. I went to every customer he had and said, hey, Macho Sports is no longer in town, but Bet ODOG is. And that's when my company blew up. I flew to Costa Rica, which was the mecca of sports betting. And I went to every office in San Jose, and I said, hey, I know you guys do call centers down here for sports betting. What do I got to do? And, I went to 20 different offices, and I found one that was in a town called Playa Hermosa. I started to pay a service where I'd pay like $10 for each customer that gambled with me. I started my website called betodog.com. My nickname was ODOG in college. So you get to basically create your own domain. You get a 800 phone number, and you can start acting as a bookie. So one outfit can manage, hundreds of different bookies. So I started my business like that, where I'm paying a weekly fee, and now I'm the book. So I'm collecting all the money. I'm only taking little bets, like $1,000 here, $1,100 here, $200 here. I was like, okay, I got to figure out a better strategy. So I went back to Costa Rica. We ended up setting up our own office where I had my own people that were under my payroll that moved the lines specifically to Las Vegas. And I had my managers that handled all my VIP customers that would answer the phone directly. Hey, this is Bet ODOG. How can I help you? Oh, hi, Mr. Drew. What's your password? Okay, how can I help you, Mr. Drew? So it was more of a custom feeling, and they weren't betting with this per head count site. I was able to start recruiting all over the United States, and I started to become one of the biggest bookies throughout Los Angeles, expanding to Texas, to Florida, North Carolina, and I got pretty much in every state. I was in illegal sports betting back in the early 2007 all the way till my arrest in 2015. Sports betting became legal in 2018. It became legal on a state-by-state basis, and it eliminated the federal ban. The difference between legal sports betting and illegal sports betting is very simple. A legal bookmaker usually is offshore, has a website that's ran through usually Costa Rica, Panama, and you call an 800 number or you place your bet through an app that's offshore. A legal sports betting website is, you put your credit card down, there's a know your customers form you have to fill out, and everything's monitored, and you pay taxes on that money. The sports betting world that I was in, was obviously illegal. It was offshore. I would give a line of credit, meaning that if you wanted to play with me, it was like an American Express credit card. I give you, say, a $10,000 line of credit. That's week to week, and come Monday, once the last Sunday night football game is graded, you pay me, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday the following week. And if you don't pay me, then we obviously have to go to other matters, whether it's making phone calls or sending someone to pick up the money, and that's what's different from today's legal sports betting. When you're gambling through like the BetMGM or FanDuel, any of the big outfits, now you put a credit card up or you deposit cash, and that makes it legitimate. So the casinos or the sports books nowadays never have to worry. They give so much more credit as far as like free play. So if you deposit $1 million, then you get $100,000 in free play. As a bookie, we offered the same thing, but we're giving you a line of credit. So you have to basically lose the money before we collect. I played on 2 national championship football teams. So when I would go to a sports fan, whether, most people in the sports betting industry always bet on football. So I'd be like, hey, I was part of the last 2 national championships at USC. I'd show them the ring. I'd show them a picture of Reggie Bush and I, Matt Leinart and I, Carson Palmer, Troy Polamalu, and they'd be like, wow. And I would use that network because everybody that gambled had some kind of liking to sports, and it was mostly football. So it was very easy to pull that card. Yeah, the clientele business was always a referral basis. It always would start small. One guy would say, hey, you should bet with ODOG at Bet ODOG. He played at USC, and sometimes you would get these guys called whales, and they'd come in and they're like, man, I was a big Leinart fan. I'm like, oh, you're a Leinart fan? No. Well, listen, who do you gamble with? Oh, you bet with 5 dimes? I said, well, you bet with Bet ODOG, I'll introduce you to Leinart, and I'll get you a signed football. How's that? So I'd call Matt up and, hey, I need a signed football. And, hey, where are you at next week? So I'd call my future customer, and be like, hey, I'm going to introduce you to Leinart, and we'd go meet him at the bar or at a restaurant, and just these guys would be blown away because I had that kind of relationship. And it was so easy for me and get people to switch over to my site. My first whale that I pulled in was a general contractor. He was extremely large in the commercial construction space. When I was working at the real estate developer's office, that this contractor would always step outside, and I would hear him betting on sports. I went back to him and I told him, hey, I know you gamble. I said, what if I gave you 10% off your losses and 20% free play? And I didn't care at the time because I just wanted his business. And from there, it just was referral basis. I ended up getting 3 guys that were project managers underneath him at the office that were making $250,000 a year in construction and giving me about half of that in their paychecks. The bets started getting big right after Macho Sports got busted, and the biggest wager I took was $250,000 on a Super Bowl bet. In the beginning, when I first started this operation, I was like, man, I'm gonna lose my whole nest egg, right? And then eventually you realize the house doesn't lose. I've never had a losing year. A lot of athletes and celebrities chose me because I was very discreet, right? You when you're betting in your professional athlete, you don't want to be known that you're betting. With me, it was like you could go to the country club, have a round of golf with me, and if you beat me the week before, I'd be there with a bag of cash to give you, and you wouldn't have to have a wire. You wouldn't have to have your wife know. You wouldn't have a text message saying, hey, here's what you owe. It would just be, I was very discreet, and I made it so it was comfortable for them. College athletes, you got to remember, I went to USC, so they had daddy's credit card, that American Express Black Card. I always tell people, we can use that for anything. I would have these guys, put $100,000 that they owed me on a Home Depot charge. That would be, $100,000 in material I have for a real estate project I'm doing. So I would never turn down a method. So if a guy couldn't pay me in cash, I would say pay me in gold or pay me with a watch. I can't remember how many watches I got paid, whether it was a Rolex or AP. I've even got paid in a sailboat. One guy owed me $120,000 and he ended up paying me in a catamaran sailboat. Yeah, as a bookmaker, you're always trying to get an edge, whether, you get inside information on a team. Let's just say, for instance, that UNLV's quarterback's going to be out because let's just say he had a cold and no one knew, but if I knew the wide receiver and he came and told me that information, I would be like, okay, let's change the odds real fast here. Let's put the odds in our favor now because we know the quarterback's not going to play. So you get an edge. And anytime you have an edge in sports betting, it's huge. As a bookmaker, at a very young age, my mentor told me, hey, why don't you see if, your old quarterback will throw the game. We'll offer him $100,000. So it happens, It's just whether it can be played out, because when you're gambling in the Division I sports, you got a lot of eyes on you. Now, if it was like a smaller school, like a Division III school, then it would be a lot easier to pay someone off. A prop bet is a proposition wager. So it would be, let's give an example. If Kansas City's playing the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl, the proposition bet would be who's going to score the first touchdown. Would it be Kansas City Chiefs or the Philadelphia Eagles? Or another prop bet could be, will the quarterback throw over or under 2.5 touchdowns? So prop bets make the game more exciting. So you can have it for specific players, you can have it for teams, you can have it for anything, basically. You can even have a proposition, who will become president of the United States? Will it be Obama or will it be President Trump? So that's what a prop bet is, a proposition wager. Once the system was in place, I realized that I had so many gamblers betting on sports, I decided to expand my gambling empire. And I started to realize there was a niche for a live dealer. So I would offer my clients that were betting on sports now to bet on table games. In Costa Rica, I set up a live dealer where I would have a blackjack table and I would have the cameras on the dealer. So now I have my dealer in Costa Rica on camera, basically dealing the cards. And now as a customer, you feel like you're not getting cheated because you're playing against a real dealer that's live. So once I expanded that, I had a lot more clientele coming to me now, because now they didn't even have to go to Las Vegas. NFL star who got indicted on my case, won 3 Super Bowls, Derek Lavelle, was a gambling customer of mine. Paris Hilton was one of my A-list celebrities that bet with me. There's definitely a lot more, but I'm not going to go into detail. I had a manager that acted as like my CFO, and he would call literally every Sunday. He would send out an email. If you lost, he would send out an email Sunday night, so Monday morning when they get to their office, they'd have an email. If they lost, it would be an email that says, you lost $2,600.52, and you can pay any of these three options. I had a gold business called the Gold Fellas, and I would give them three options. They could pay by PayPal, they could pay on a credit card through the Gold Fellas, or they could pay through a banking system, and we had shell companies. So the way I did it back then, you had Bank of America, Chase, and Wells Fargo. Those were the three top banks. So I had these shell companies for each bank. The guy would get to his office Monday morning, and he could literally pay any way he wanted to. He could pay right there on PayPal, or he could run his credit card and it would be charged to Gold Fellas. We'd send out a receipt saying that he purchased, X amount of dollars of gold. And that was our strategy. Now, if a guy won, we would send the same exact email to the winner, and we'd say, you won $32,000. How would you like to be paid? This was before the deposits of cash was a big deal, So we would allow $9,900 we could deposit in cash into your account. So if a guy hit me for, let's say, $29,000, he could give me three accounts. So I could go 99, 99, 99 and pay through the banking system, which made it easier. A lot of people would want to meet up in person. I would send a runner, and my runners would make $100 a drop. So if a guy, like I said, won $30,000, I'd say, hey, runner A, go ahead and take it to Tony P over there and give him $30,000. And we would pay on Monday, and that's what blew us up, because most bookies, what they do is they go collect from the losers, and then they pay the winners, but they don't pay the winners till like Thursday, Friday. But I had a big enough bankroll at the time that I was able to pay my winning customers on Monday, because the reason I paid them on a Monday is I want them to have the money in the hand. When someone has the money in hand, they're more likely to gamble it away and lose it faster. Once the bets were in and I've collected the winnings, the way I hid the money was gold and silver. My credit system was all based on how fast and how well you paid me. So if you were on a credit line of $20,000 and in the first week you lost $10,000 and you paid me, right away without any excuses, I would bump that credit line up to $50,000. If you gave me any kind of reason that you couldn't pay, like if you were a slow pay, like it took you a month to pay me a $5,000 marker, then I would drop your line of credit. I try to minimize the credit card transactions because, like I said, you don't want much of a paper trail. Towards the end, some people couldn't pay me with cash, and that's when I set up the gold company. And I offered a gold service where I had, private vaults in Beverly Hills, and if you purchased gold from me, I would store your gold and silver there, and if you needed to be paid in cash or gold, I offered that option. So it made it simple for me, because a lot of guys, say in North Carolina, that owed me, let's say, $50,000, I'd just say, hey Timmy, I'm going to run your credit card for 5 days for right around $9,000, and I'm just going to send you an invoice for some gold that you purchased from me, and that would legitimize the transaction. Gold was the key to the laundering system, because you could purchase gold with cash, and then you could take that gold and go to a gold store, and you can give them any kind of bullion, whether it's 1 ounce or 100 pounds, and the bullion company will give you the spot value. So if gold is trading at whatever that value is, the gold company will collect it, and then they'll send a wire anywhere in the world. So that's how I would launder it. One of the ways I had to get money out of a country was through bullion. I was in Australia, and one of the ways that I was going to get the gold out of Australia was to research what's the most popular thing. And I did some homework, and I found out that UGG boots are the most sold items in Australia. And so I purchased, thousands and thousands of pairs of UGG boots, and I'd have the 1 ounce rounds, and I would take 4 1 ounce rounds, and I'd put it in the sole of the UGG boot, and I would tape it underneath the sole. At the time, I want to say it was, $1,500. So you're looking at $6,000 per UGG boot. There's 2 UGG boots, that's $12,000. And I was, sending 10 pairs of UGG boots every week. So that's 120 grand I'm laundering through UGG boots and gold weekly. You have to move money offshore because you want to protect yourself from the U.S. government. And when you're offshore, you avoid the U.S. government finding the money, obviously. So anytime you can get somewhere where that country doesn't associate with the government or cooperate with any kind of illegal activity with the government, then that's the best place to launder it offshore. ATMs was key for my business because when someone goes into a bank, they're not going to have issues pulling out the cash if they're an owner of an ATM business. So the guys that are working for me own the ATM companies. For TB, for instance, I can talk about him. He was indicted on my case. When he would go in and pull out, let's say, $80,000 on a Monday and $100,000 on a Tuesday, the teller is not looking at him like he's some drug dealer, right? The teller is looking at this business that says ATM Unlimited, and he knows right away, like, that teller knows, okay, this guy's in the ATM business. This cash is going into ATM machines that's servicing people throughout the United States when they use their ATM machine. It made it real easy to launder the money through the ATM business because he was benefiting by making 3%, and now I'm getting bags of cash without any eyes being raised. In the beginning, it was like $1 million a week, and then towards the end of my downfall, I would say, we were taking in between $10 and $20 million of bets in a week. Man, the most sophisticated money I was moving was the Bank of China. The Bank of China in Australia allowed you to deposit cash at any given time. They would transfer the money anywhere in the world you wanted it. So I would come into the Bank of China with different IDs, and I had 10 different aliases between me and 4 other guys, and the Bank of China would look at us. It wouldn't be our name, but they wouldn't know because they had no clue. And they would wire anywhere in the world for us. And that was the key to my moving my money the fastest, besides the casinos. The casinos are the best and fastest way to launder money because there's never any question. Because when you're dealing with these high roller, these clients that gamble in the casino, it's very common for them to have money either wired into the cage or cash brought in through gambling methods. I was the boss, so I didn't really keep track of what I was paying myself, but I was spending $200,000 a month in my partying and traveling the world, and my big thing was watches. I was probably one of the first guys to have a Richard Mille watch back in 2011. No one even knew what a Richard Mille was. I had mansions in Costa Rica, Mexico, Peru, Hollywood Hills. That was my vice was that luxury lifestyle, fast cars, and it ended up being my downfall. I never gambled because I was the book. What affected me the most was using drugs. I was a party animal. I would go through an 8-ball of cocaine a day. I'd do a half of Purell hand sanitizer, which a hand sanitizer is 2 ounces. I would do one of those every day of GHB, which is terrible for you. I would drink alcohol on a daily basis, and not one day went by where I wasn't partying. Gambling and drugs overlap for VIP bettors because every VIP bettor likes to party. So when I would take one of my whale customers on a private jet and I'd fly him to Costa Rica, what's the first thing he wants to do? He wants to do an 8-ball of Colombian cocaine. Colombia is only an hour from Costa Rica, so obviously we have the probably the best cocaine in the world there. So when I bring a VIP customer to Costa Rica, and I give him the best Colombian cocaine he's ever had, and then we take him to a sports bar, and I just gave him the best VIP service of his life. So it went hand in hand with my business. When I think of betting and organized crime, I kind of intertwine together because the betting world started with organized crime back in the mafia days, right? The mob, the Italian mob. For me, they really intertwined in the organized crime world when I started taking bets for the most infamous cartel in the world. And obviously I can't speak on who it was, but I started taking bets, and next thing you know, I'm not only taking bets, now I'm helping them launder money through their illegal activity as well. And that's where my business intertwined, and I started working in the international drug trade. I had a bookie out of Newport Beach that worked underneath me, and he was Hispanic. And one day he started to have this customer bet large amounts on football, and he started paying me every week, and it was like bags of cash, like $250,000 at a time in duffel bags. And I remember telling this sub bookie, I said, "Man, you got a whale on your hands." He goes, "Yeah, I got a guy out of Mexico that bets with me." And I said, "Well, man, keep him happy. Whatever we need to do, keep that man happy," because I said, these are like once in a lifetime customers. So I'm getting these duffel bags dropped off. I'm like, man, whatever this guy wants, you just let him know. We give him the VIP treatment. He's no reason for him to go to Vegas. He bets with Bet ODOG. The sub bookie, I said, hey, whatever that guy needs, if he needs, Laker tickets, if he needs Dodger tickets, whatever he wants, if he wants to stay at the Four Seasons and have dinner on me, let him know. And didn't think anything of it. And then finally, this customer of my sub bookie, he finally hit. He hit for close to $250,000. And as a bookie, you always want your customer to win. I tell people, if your customer loses every day, every game, every week, every month, guess what? He's going to quit. He's not going to keep doing it because it's not fun. You can't be greedy. You want to be able to give him some, because when you give him something, then guess what? He's going to lose that back plus some. So I said, Monday morning, you're going to be there at 8 a.m. sharp. I said, I want you to go give him this duffel bag of his money because he's going to be expecting it. And a couple days go by, my sub bookie says, hey, my uncle really liked how you handled that payment. That was my uncle that's been gambling. He gambles. He lives in Mexico. And he says, by the way, he wants to talk to you. And he slaps this encrypted phone on the table. We're at Javier's Mexican restaurant in Newport Beach. And he gives me that encrypted phone. I'm like, what the is this? And he's like, there's no microphone. There's no GPS. He says, you can't call on it. He says, all you can do is email. He says, there's 3 passwords to get into that encrypted phone. I'm like, and he writes me a message, and I read it after I got in three passwords deep, and I get in there, and he says, Wedo, I like the way you do business. Thanks for paying me. I wrote him back. And then he responded back. He goes, I know as a bookmaker, you probably have cash throughout the United States. Do you think you can help me move some money around, and I'll pay you? And then he told me I need $100,000 dropped off in San Diego. He goes, every time you drop off money for me, I will give you 10% fee. So I'm making 10% to drop off $100,000. That's 2 hours away. 100,000, 10%, that's $10,000 for a 2-hour drive. That's easy. So for me, I just called Tony, my bookie, or Ryan, my bookie, or Robert, or Matt. I say, hey, Matt, can you drop off $100,000 in San Diego at National City? Boom, he drops off $100,000. This guy sends me an encrypted message saying, hey, where do you want the $110,000? So now I just dropped off 100,000 cash, and now this guy, we'll call him El Jefe, is taking 110 and putting it anywhere in the world. Well, guess what? I'm running this big operation in Costa Rica where I have a 20,000 square foot building. So it'd be really easy if he sends me that 110,000 to a Costa Rica bank account. Now I can pay my employees, and I have money to pay for my rent, pay for my house I'm building. So now I'm helping this member that lives in Mexico clean his money, and he needs things done in North Carolina. He needed a couple 100,000, same thing. So now we're working hand in hand, and he's paying me a fee. But unbeknownst to me, I still don't know what kind of trade he's in. And it gets bigger and bigger, and it starts to snowball. And next thing you know, I'm moving money all over the world for him. Now at this point, because I was making so much money with the cartel and working for them, this whale customer of mine became, my number one focus. So once I started working for the cartel, the gambling was just like an add-on to my business. I had the cartel's backing as far as betting wise. They gave me any kind of money I needed to take bets. When you're dealing with the cartel, you can be killed at any time because they have an army of guys that work for them. They have these guys called sicarios that are basically their hitmen. So obviously, I didn't have to stress when I was dealing with, these celebrities or these professional athletes. But when I'm dealing with the cartel, you obviously got to stress and look over your shoulder all the time. I shipped drugs internationally for, obviously, the cartel I worked for, to Australia, to Canada, to Italy, to Amsterdam. Obviously, this is all public record, so I can talk about it. And throughout the United States. My big focus was cocaine, and obviously we did deal with ecstasy, MDMA, and towards the end they were shipping kilos of China white heroin. I tell people not one day did I not fall asleep with my eye open. Like I would always have one eye open when I slept. And anytime I traveled with my security guards or my sicarios later when I started working for the cartel, you're always on pins and needles. You're always thinking that something bad could happen. And yes, I obviously regret it, but it's the path that I chose, and I have to live with it forever. And I'm glad what happened, and I went to federal prison because I tell people going to prison is the best thing that happened to me. It saved my life. I can't really discuss a business on the cartel because that would be considered cooperation, and that would end up probably costing me my life. Obviously, the FBI gave me the opportunity to cooperate against the cartel, and I refused just to save my life and my family's life. So I can't really talk about that but I think anybody that knows anything, the cartel obviously runs off of illegal drugs, and that's how they make their money. Common sense. For me as a bookmaker, obviously you never want to put hands on a customer to collect the money, because that's when I say it's the fan, right? So I tell people it's all about intimidation. You want to put the fear of God in them. I had collectors that were 6'6" Samoans that weighed 350 pounds. That's all their job was to do, was to intimidate. I would show up to breakfast with him, and I would meet my customer, let's say in Newport Beach, and my customer would be sitting at that breakfast table waiting, and I would show up with this 350-pound Samoan guy with tattoos on his face, and right away my customer would be like, okay, how do I pay you? If that didn't work, I used to take that ID, and that ID would have the address. So with that ID and that address, I would be able to give that to my private investigator that was on my payroll. And he was able to access that ID and give me everybody in the family's name that lived at that location. So with that information, I would take the wife's name, and I'd have my private investigator run the wife's name. And the wife's information would be where she works, what kind of car she drives. And now it makes it easier for my team to do a little more homework and send a bouquet of flowers. So one of my tactics was, if the husband was refusing to pay me and just blowing me off, I would say, let's locate where the wife works. We'll send a bouquet of flowers to her work, and we'll leave just a simple message. And the message would read, tell your husband it's time to pay up. And once they got that bouquet of flowers and they read it's time to pay up, they would freak out. Like, what's this mean? They'd call their husband. I just got a bouquet of flowers and it says it's time to pay up. And the husband would get on the phone and call me and say, hey, don't ever send flowers to my wife again. Where do I pay? I said, well, I'm glad you got the message. And that's how I use my tactics. I would definitely say I regret scaring people. I do regret sending one of my collectors that was supposed to specifically put the intimidation factor into this client. I do regret him going to that house, and his only purpose was just to basically scare the person, because the person would never guess that I would actually have someone collect the money and show up to his doorstep in Minnesota. No one ever thought I would send someone for a guy that owed me $2,000 and send a collector, knowing I'm in Los Angeles, and send a collector to Minnesota. But it was principle, because the guy had won, $10,000 a week before. And now all of a sudden he loses $2,000 and he told me to me, and he's not paying me. So to me, that's insulting, because now you're stealing. You stole the $10,000 that I paid you, and now you're not paying me the $2,000. So I do regret that I sent a collector to the guy's door, and the guy had some balls, and he opened the door, and he made a threat to my collector, and my collector ended up hitting him. And that got me an enhancement for, violent activity for illegal bookmaking, which in the federal guidelines, it raises your points. And when you get more points, you get more time. I got 21 and a half years for illegal bookmaking and distribution of cocaine. Now, if that violence wasn't there on my record, the time would have been a lot less. But I do regret that for sure, because I never wanted anybody to get hurt in this business. 95% of the threats, the verbal threats, or the bouquet of flowers, or, calling. Sometimes I had customers that were in their 20s and they didn't want to pay. I'd call their fathers and tell their fathers, hey, your son has a gambling problem. He doesn't want to pay. do you want to pay, or how do you want me to handle this? And usually, like I said, 95% of the time, the family member or the father would pay the debt. That 5% chance that they didn't, things got ugly, I can't stop what my collectors are doing. I'm remorseful for what I've done. I put all these bad things on the streets and ruined thousands of people's lives. And obviously, it took me to sober up to realize, like, wow, what the was I doing? Going to the University of Southern California or the University of Spoiled Children, raised from a father that was a construction worker, my mother was a librarian, you realize that you need to figure out how you're going to survive. Being sidelined as a volleyball player with an injury, my coach pulled me over and called me in the office, and he said, "Hey, Hanson, I need you to work on your arm strength because it's not as strong as it used to be, and your vertical jump." And when he told me that, he says, "I'm going to redshirt you." And in college, when someone tells you you're going to be redshirted, it's basically saying you're put on the bench, you're kicked off until you get better or until you recover, your injury recovers. So that day, I just remember, like, I was so bummed out. I came to USC to play sports, and I said to myself, man, what am I going to do to speed up this recovery? And I decided to go to Gold's Gym and talk to the biggest bodybuilder there. And he said, "You want to do it illegally?" I said, "Yeah, I want to do it illegally." He says, "You got to get steroids." And he starts writing down these names for me. And he goes, "They're really expensive." And he says, "Well, I suggest if you don't have money, you can go to the veterinarian in Tijuana." I had my grandfather's car, 1989 Toyota Camry, and I got in that car and I drove to the Tijuana border. Pull up to the pharmacia, and I knew I was at the right spot because there's like 6 bodybuilders in there, just big dudes. And I was like, okay, this is the spot. And I go in there and I slap the list of names on there, and the lady's just marking it off. We got that, we got that. And I'll never forget, she gives it to me, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, how am I going to get these things back? I got all these steroids. I can't just walk across the border back with them. They're going to stop me. I saw there was some gauze and some medical tape that was near the bathroom, and I said, "Do you mind if I use your restroom?" She's like, yeah, go ahead. I said, "Can I purchase some of the gauze and medical tape?" And she's like, yeah, go ahead. So I go in the bathroom and I drop my drawers, and I got my compressor shorts on from my USC volleyball days, and I drop those, and I just start taping up all these steroids, the vials, and making it, long, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to fit it? I'm going to have to fit it in my crack, okay, and then the pills, okay, I'm going to wrap those around my legs, and I wanted everything to look as small and compact as possible. And I remember putting my compressor shorts on and going, all right, let's go. I walked across the bridge back to the US side, and you get stopped by customs, and they ask you, "Are you bringing anything back?" They said, "What were you doing in Mexico?" And my heart dropped, like I'm about to lie to this guy, right? I'm like, "I was at Papa's and Beer. We were having some drinks and some tacos." He says, "Welcome back to America," and he went like this. My heart just was like, wow, what a rush. And to this day, every time I tell the story, I still get goosebumps thinking about that feeling you have that you just broke the law and you just beat the system. And from that day forward, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Because that rush was what I kept chasing and chasing and chasing until it got bigger and bigger and bigger, which led to my downfall. My first official hustle became, once I got back to USC from smuggling those steroids, I just started taking them. And people saw me blowing up, and they're like, "Wow, what are you taking?" I had guys on the football team asking me, and I said, "I'm taking Decadurabolin, I'm taking Sustanon 250, I'm taking Winstrol, I'm taking Anavar." I'm just listing these names. They're like, "Man, we want to look like you." Like, okay, well, I got this bottle for 300, I got these pills for 400, I got this HGH for 1,000. I said, "What do you guys want?" And that started to become my hustle. And I would go down to Mexico every week and smuggle more steroids back and provide it to the athletes that were all throughout the USC campus. And that was my motivation to keep up with the Joneses, be able to afford, dinner out with some cute sorority girls and live life like everyone else is living there. The demand was high. It was a thing where every week I was taking that Toyota Camry and driving to the Tijuana border, parking at Jock in the Box and walking across. And the bigger I got, the more baggy clothes I had to wear because I had to cover up the size I had. And I remember I f***ed up one summer. I had this Quicksilver sweatshirt on, and it was summertime, and it was like a double XL, but it covered my muscles, because at this point I was big. I was like 240 pounds. And the same question was asked, what were you doing in Mexico? And he passed, and he waved me forward to pass me, but there was another officer that came around, and he goes, let me pat you down, because he saw I was wearing a sweatshirt, and it was 100 degrees out, so it looked weird. He's like, why are you wearing a sweatshirt in this heat? And my heart dropped, because I was like, okay, is he going to strip me out? Because he's patting my body down. I'm like, if he goes any lower, he's going to feel the bulge. And the bulge was down below in the private section. So he's like, all right, you're good. And he sent me on my way. And after that, I was like, okay, I got to figure out a better way. I started to use my network of women that I was, friends with and dating, and offer them drinks. And on our way back, we'd stop at the Pharmacia, and I say, hey, can you girls do me a favor? I'll give you $100, and they'd put them in their bras and in their underwear, and that started my smuggling tactics. So when I was at SC, I realized that there was a more of a demand, not only for the steroids, but there's now I'm in the fraternity, and I notice all these kids are staying up late to complete their midterms, or they have finals or papers to write, and I notice a lot of these kids are taking what is Adderall, and they're buying it from like a local dealer, and they're paying $20 a pill. And then I noticed when they fell asleep, they would take Xanax to help them fall asleep, because they were so wired from the Adderall. So I was like, okay, I know I can probably get that down there. So I started to drive to Mexico and start picking up the Adderall, the Xanax, the Valiums, the Somas, and now I became this black market concierge, where I was providing everything from performance enhancing drugs for the athletes to Xanax and Adderall for the guys that were in the fraternity or the sorority girls that are staying up. And that became my new hustle, and the markup was ridiculous. I was paying, I believe, 50 cents for a Xanax 2 milligram, and we were selling them for $5. So it's 1,000% markup, and it's something small and compact, and I can easily transport it across the border. And it's only a 2-hour drive from USC, so it worked well. The moment I thought I went too far was the day I knew that I was working for the cartel, but I continued to work for them because I was making $1 million a day in cash. When I lost cartel money, it changed my life forever, because now I became indebted to the cartel. And that's where you have to watch the documentary to see what happens. I nearly spent 10 years in federal prison. I was sentenced to 21 and a half years for racketeering and illegal drug distribution. I served my federal prison time, FCI at Lompoc, Victorville, FCI, and FCI Inglewood, Colorado. The United States government forfeited an asset forfeiture of $5 million, including millions of dollars of bullion, 4 homes, 3 Range Rovers, a Porsche Panamera, and a catamaran sailboat. I have the next 10 years under federal probation, and every month I'm checking in, doing a urine analysis, a UA. I have to meet up with my probation officer weekly and give him reports for every kind of transaction I do, for banking, any kind of money I spend. So it's difficult, but you know what, we're going to get through it, because it's a lot easier when you're not doing anything illegal, and it feels good for once. I was cutting corners because I wanted to make that fast cash, and that fast cash ended up costing me, 10 years of my life. You decide you want to go down that path, and you want to be some quote-unquote gangster. Well, guess what? Gangsters belong in prison, and you're going to end up in prison one day if you go down that path of organized crime. My future goals is to create something that's the opposite of what I was doing in the past, right? I was putting these bad things on the streets, and my new goal is to put healthy treats on the streets. And the way I'm doing that is I've created this brand called California Ice Protein, and it's a protein ice cream. I wrote my book, The California Kid, while I was in federal prison, and now that's been released and that's out. And for the last 6 years, I've been working on the documentary called The Cocaine Quarterback, and that's with Mark Wahlberg's company, Unrealistic Ideas. I had a great relationship with my father. My father was my best friend. He still is my best friend to this day. And the relationship obviously was damaged when I went to federal prison, because your parents don't know that you were involved in organized crime. And, I remember looking at my mother, and she was very disappointed, and my father as well. But I think they've accepted the fact that I made the mistakes, and I believe they see that I'm not going down that path again, and I've changed my life for the better. And I hope everybody, believes in a second chance, because I'm a prime example of a redemption story. Before, an old bookmaker used to do everything pen and pencil. So when you would want to bet on a game, you'd call your bookie, and you'd say, hey, I want to bet on the Lakers. And the bookmaker would say, okay, we got the Lakers at -10, over under is 202. So the player would bet it based off the line that the bookmaker would give you off the phone and write it down on the paper. And that was the old school way. And then eventually people started betting through the app online, which technology has grown, where it started with www. Now people have betting apps where they can just bet directly off the app. And now it's gotten so big, it's called live wagering. So if you're watching a basketball game, and you bet the game for, let's just say the total was, over 202, and all of a sudden you're watching the game and you're like, man, my total is not going to hit. So now you can literally place a wager at the time of the game. So it could be the fourth quarter with 2 minutes left, and you can still place a wager to chase and hopefully catch up to your bet that you're going to lose. This day and era, I think Bitcoin is obviously the number one currency used for this illegal activity of sports betting. And I remember, man, I kicked myself for this one. My manager at the time was calling me and saying, hey, this guy wants to pay us in Bitcoin. This was like 2015. And I think Bitcoin was like $50 a coin at the time. I'm like, man, I don't want anything to do with that cryptocurrency stuff, man. I don't trust it. Tell him to go himself. He's got to pay us in cash. I truly believe that there's always going to be a niche for illegal bookmakers, but I feel the future will have legal sports betting. Eventually, people will be able to bet at all sporting event arenas throughout the United States. Sports betting is a vice. It's an addiction. Now that sports gambling is legal, you see promotions everywhere. Everyone's getting into it, from clothing companies to alcohol companies, and they're all collaborating together to create a larger betting atmosphere for people that are involved with sports. I mean, nowadays, when you're watching a football game and you see a FanDuel commercial or BetMGM, it's obviously used to be taboo, right? And now you see you're watching a football game and you're watching a BetMGM ad with Jamie Foxx, and you're like, wow, I'm going to bet with them. I want to bet with BetMGM because Jamie Foxx bets with them. And I think it's so much easier now for these bigger brands to get exposure with all the celebrity base of people they have that are, the forefront of the commercials. And it just generates a lot more activity for people to gamble. The offshore bookies, the illegal bookies, are still thriving because they're giving the line of credit. And the FanDuels and the DraftKings are no longer able to give a line of credit. They have to take a credit card or some form of payment. And there's always going to be that illegal bookmaker, because he's the one that gives you a line of credit. College football has changed drastically since my days. Now we have the NIL, and guys are getting paid. Who would ever thought college players are getting paid millions of dollars to play the game? I mean, if legal betting and NIL existed when I was playing, it would have been a whole nother path for sure, no doubt. I would have needed to be an illegal bookmaker. And obviously, if we were paid college athletes, I wouldn't have needed to start the hustle, right? The art of the hustle started in college. So definitely my life would have been extremely different. Even the guys riding the bench, like myself, right, would still get a paycheck, and that would definitely have helped. I remember reading somewhere that a third string offensive line guy was paid like $80,000 through NIL deals. So just imagine if I would have had that kind of money back then to be able to, take a girl to dinner or drive a nicer car. I wouldn't be trying to fit in like I was. Don't make that right turn, because this could happen to anyone. You could come from that same family I came from, working class, and you're trying to fit in with the rich kids, and next thing you know, you're doing illegal activity. And I wouldn't want to see anyone serve time in jail or prison, because it's no place anybody wants to be. It's the bottom of the earth. It's hell. You're in a 6x8 prison cell, and you don't see the sunlight for more than an hour a day, and it's a place that you never want to go to.